She thought she was teaching, but love taught her more than words ever could. Jane Matthews had taught for nearly 10 years, yet every September she still felt the flutter of nerves as new faces filled her classroom. Words were her world, novels, essays, poems, and she lived for the moment a student's eyes lit up with understanding. Outside the classroom, though, she had a quieter life. Friends often teased her for being married to her job. Love had never quite taken root. That Friday, however, had nothing to do with school. She found herself at the community center, reluctantly attending the local arts fair after a colleague begged her to show support. Jane wandered past stalls of handmade pottery, watercolor paintings, and baskets of fresh bread. She was about to leave when a small group of children caught her eye, gathered around a woman painting with bold strokes of color. The woman was striking, not in a loud way, but in the kind of way that drew you in and refused to let go. She had dark hair tucked behind her ears, a soft scarf draped carelessly over one shoulder, and a smile that radiated warmth. Jane stood at the edge of the crowd, watching as the woman guided a child's hand across the canvas, signing something with her free hand. At first, Jane thought the gestures were playful, but then she noticed the fluency of movement, the quick, graceful motions. Realization dawned. She's signing. One of the kids laughed, voicing what the woman had signed. Jane felt her heart skip. The woman's world wasn't one of words spoken aloud, but of hands and expressions alive with meaning. When the crowd thinned, Jane finally stepped closer. "The painting is beautiful," she said, her voice a little too formal. The woman looked up, her eyes deep and searching. She tilted her head slightly, then reached for a small notepad resting on the table. In neat, looping handwriting, she wrote, "Thank you. My name is Elena." Jane smiled, nervous but eager. She wrote back, "Jane. I teach literature. You teach art?" Elena's eyes sparkled. She nodded, tapping the children's canvas, then signed something with both hands. Jane didn't understand, but she didn't need to. She caught the laugh, the softness of Elena's smile. In that moment, Jane felt something shift inside her. She didn't know the language. She didn't know the steps. But she knew she wanted to learn. The fair ended, but Jane couldn't shake Elena from her thoughts. The image of her hands moving through the air like poetry stayed with her all weekend. Monday morning, she found herself standing in front of her students, reading a passage from Emily Dickinson, but her mind kept drifting back to the quiet art instructor with the radiant smile. By Wednesday, she had decided to do something she hadn't done in years, step into the unknown. That evening, she walked into the community center again. A sign by the door read, "Beginners BSL class, 6 p.m. Jane's pulse quickened. She hesitated in the hallway, wondering if she was being foolish, but when she peeked inside and saw a circle of strangers practicing the alphabet with clumsy fingers, she exhaled and joined them. The first hour was awkward. Jane kept mixing up letters, her fingers stiff with nervousness, but for once, she wasn't the teacher. She was the student. And it felt good to learn. The following Saturday, Jane found herself back at the art room. Elena was there again, surrounded by brushes and a half-finished canvas of wild, sweeping colors. The children weren't around this time. Jane stepped inside, heart hammering. Elena looked up, recognition lighting her face. She waved warmly, then gestured for Jane to sit. Jane lifted her hands, slowly, carefully. "Hello." The sign was clumsy, but it was there. Elena's eyebrows lifted in delighted surprise. She signed back quickly, her hands graceful and fluid. Jane froze, not catching a single thing. Flustered, she pulled a small notebook from her bag and scribbled. "I started learning BSL. I'm very bad. But I want to learn." Elena read the words, then touched her chest with one hand. "Thank you," before reaching across the table to lightly squeeze Jane's fingers. Her touch was brief, but enough to send heat rushing to Jane's cheeks. She signed something again, slower this time. Jane recognized just one word. "Friend." Jane smiled. Friend, she echoed aloud, placing her hand gently against her chest the way she had been taught. Elena nodded, but there was a softness in her eyes that made Jane wonder if the word was only the beginning of something larger. That night, Jane lay awake replaying every moment. The brush of Elena's hand, the curve of her smile, the spark of joy when Jane signed a single, simple word. For the first time in years, Jane felt that her life was opening, like a book whose most important chapters hadn't yet been written. The weeks slipped into a quiet rhythm. School in the mornings, lesson planning in the evenings, and once a week, Jane's halting but steady progress in her BSL class. But what she looked forward to most were the Saturdays. Elena always seemed to be at the community center, painting or tidying brushes in her art room. Sometimes children were there, their laughter echoing as they splashed paint across canvases. Sometimes it was just the two of them, sunlight slanting through tall windows, filling the room with the scent of turpentine and possibility. Jane brought coffee once, awkwardly holding out the paper cup. She hadn't known Elena's order, so she bought 2 different kinds. Elena laughed silently when she realized, tapping her lips with one finger to indicate, "Thank you," before pointing to the sweeter one. They began sitting together during the quieter hours. Jane practiced her new words: paint, book, teacher, beautiful, while Elena corrected her gently, touching Jane's hands to adjust a shape, guiding her wrists with patient tenderness. It was during one of these afternoons, while Elena leaned close to show her how to sign dream, that Jane caught herself staring. Not at her hands, but at her face. The way her lashes brushed against her cheeks. The curve of her smile when Jane finally got it right. The faint scent of lavender clinging to her scarf. Their eyes met. Just for a second. Long enough for Jane's breath to catch, long enough for Elena's smile to falter into something softer, something unreadable. Then Elena pulled back, her hands fluttering nervously before she grabbed her notepad. She wrote quickly. "You are learning fast." Jane took the pen from her and scribbled back. "Only because I want to talk with you." Elena's eyes flickered as she read the words. Her lips parted, then closed again. She wrote slowly, carefully. "Most people don't stay. They like the idea, not the reality." Jane's chest tightened. She understood, even without Elena spelling it out. People were curious, maybe even enchanted, but not enough to bridge the silence. Not enough to stay. Jane placed her hand over Elena's, the contact steady and deliberate. She didn't write anything. Didn't sign anything. Just looked into her eyes until Elena let out a small breath and, finally, smiled. That night, Jane replayed the moment over and over, the warmth of Elena's hand under hers, the unspoken question lingering in the air. It wasn't love yet. Not exactly. But it was moving there, inevitable as the turning of a page. It was Elena who suggested it. She handed Jane her notepad after their Saturday session, the words written in her careful looping script. "Walk with me?" Jane's heart skipped. She nodded, too quickly, and they left the paint-streaked tables behind for the crisp October air. The town was alive with the shift of seasons, scarlet leaves clinging to branches, the faint smell of wood smoke in the distance. Elena walked with her hands tucked into her coat pockets, scarf trailing behind her. Jane stayed close, their shoulders brushing every so often. Each touch sent a small, nervous thrill through her. At the park, they paused by the pond where children were feeding ducks. Elena stood watching, her face bathed in sunlight, eyes reflecting the water's shimmer. Jane fumbled for her signs, forming them slowly. "Beautiful day." Elena glanced at her, lips curving into a smile. She signed something back, slower than usual so Jane could follow. "Yes. Beautiful, company." Jane froze, warmth flooding her cheeks. She wasn't sure she'd understood correctly, but the sparkle in Elena's eyes told her she had. They found a bench beneath a willow tree. Jane pulled out her notebook, her fingers trembling slightly as she wrote. "I like being with you." Elena read it, then set the pad down without writing back. Instead, she turned fully toward Jane, her hand lifting hesitantly before brushing against Jane's hair, tucking a loose strand behind her ear. The world seemed to hush. Jane's pulse roared in her ears. She leaned in without meaning to, the air between them charged, fragile. But just before their lips could meet, Elena pulled back sharply. She looked away, chewing her lip, signing quickly. Sorry. Too fast. Jane's chest ached, but she nodded, forcing herself to smile. She signed back as best she could. Not sorry. I understand. Elena gave her a grateful look, one that held both apology and longing. They walked back in silence, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was full of things unspoken, full of possibility. That night, Jane lay awake replaying the almost kiss. It wasn't rejection, not really, it was fear. And Jane wasn't afraid of waiting. Because some things, she thought, were worth the slow burn. 2 weeks passed before Elena extended the invitation. They were cleaning brushes after an afternoon of painting with the children when Elena pulled her notebook close, writing quickly before pushing it toward Jane. Come with me tonight. My friends are meeting at the cafe. Jane's stomach fluttered. She had imagined Elena's world so often, the fast, fluid conversations in sign language, the inside jokes she wouldn't understand. It thrilled and terrified her at once. But she wrote back without hesitation. Yes. I'd like that. The cafe was small but alive with energy. As soon as Jane walked in with Elena, she noticed how different it felt. Voices were low, almost unnecessary. Instead, the air was full of movement, hands flickering, faces expressive, laughter rippling silently across tables. Elena greeted her friends with quick embraces and a flurry of signs. Jane stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed, until Elena touched her arm and gently signed. Come. They sat with a group of 4, 2 women and a man about their age, and an older woman with silver hair and warm eyes. Their hands moved so fast Jane felt dizzy watching, but she caught Elena signing her name, pointing to Jane, then fingerspelling slowly, Janie. The older woman beamed, signing something with deliberate care. Elena translated by writing on her phone. Welcome. Any friend of Elena's is our friend. Jane smiled nervously, mouthing a thank you she knew most couldn't hear. She lifted her hands, managing a shaky. Nice, meet you. The group applauded, a silent burst of encouragement that made Jane laugh out loud, relief rushing through her. As the evening went on, Jane relied on Elena's patient interpretations, but she also watched, really watched. The beauty of it struck her, whole conversations unfolding without a single spoken word, intimacy woven through hands and eyes. It wasn't silence, not really. It was its own kind of music. At one point, Elena leaned close, her lips near Jane's ear as she signed slowly so Jane could follow. You're doing well. Jane turned her head slightly, close enough to smell the faint lavender on her scarf. Her voice was a whisper, I want to belong here. With you. Elena stilled, her eyes locking onto Jane's. For a heartbeat, the whole cafe seemed to blur around them. Then Elena smiled softly, and her hand brushed against Jane's under the table. She didn't pull away. That night, walking home together beneath the city lights, Elena signed something simple, almost shyly. Thank you. You stayed. Jane's throat tightened. She signed back, slow but steady. I will always stay. And for the first time, Elena didn't look away. She just let her hands slip fully into Jane's, their fingers twining as naturally as words in a sentence that had been waiting to be spoken. The night after the cafe lingered in Jane's mind like a melody she couldn't stop humming. The way Elena's hand had rested in hers, the way she hadn't pulled away, it replayed again and again, leaving Jane restless and aching. The following Saturday, Jane arrived at the art room with 2 cups of coffee, Elena's favorite sweet one tucked safely in a sleeve. Elena was already there, hair pinned loosely, sleeves rolled up, dabs of cobalt blue staining her fingertips. She looked up as Jane entered, and her whole face lit in a smile so warm that Jane nearly forgot to breathe. They settled into the familiar rhythm, Jane practicing her signs while Elena painted, correcting her gently with soft laughter when she tangled her fingers. But today there was something heavier in the air, something unsaid hovering between each shared glance. When the room grew quiet, Jane gathered her courage. She signed slowly, carefully. I like you. Her hands trembled, but she forced them steady. Elena froze, brush midair, before setting it down. She stared at Jane, her dark eyes wide and searching. Then, with careful deliberation, she signed back. I like you, too. The words hung in the air, heavier than silence, sweeter than music. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Elena stepped closer, close enough that Jane could see the flecks of gold in her irises, close enough that their breaths mingled. Elena hesitated, her hand hovered near Jane's face, as if asking permission. Jane leaned forward, just slightly, enough to answer without words. And then, finally, their lips met. It was soft, tentative, almost shy. But as soon as Jane's hand rose to cup Elena's cheek, Elena deepened it, her fingers curling into Jane's sleeve as though anchoring herself. The kiss was unhurried, tender, full of everything they hadn't yet said. When they pulled apart, foreheads resting together, Elena smiled, a small, luminous smile that needed no translation. She signed, hands moving gently between them. Not too fast, now. Jane laughed, tears pricking her eyes as she nodded. No, she whispered. Just right. That night, Jane lay awake again, but this time, she wasn't restless. She was full, overflowing. Because the story wasn't just beginning anymore. It had truly started. The following week, Jane returned to school with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. Her students noticed it, whispering among themselves as she moved through the classroom with a quiet smile. But beneath the joy, a knot of anxiety had begun to form. It wasn't the students. It wasn't even the lesson plans. It was the outside world. At lunch, Jane's colleague, Rachel, slid into the seat across from her, an eyebrow raised. So, you've been spending a lot of time at that community center, huh? That art teacher you've been hanging out with? Jane hesitated. She wanted to shrug it off, but Rachel's tone held a faint judgment she couldn't ignore. Yes, Jane said carefully. Elena, she's wonderful. Rachel's lips tightened. I just hope you know what you're doing. Relationships with deaf people, it's different. It's complicated. Not everyone can handle it. Jane felt her chest tighten. She wanted to defend Elena, to scream that love isn't about handling someone, it's about choosing them. But she only nodded. I know what I'm doing. Later that evening, she met Elena at the park, hoping the familiar rhythm of their shared world would calm her. But the tension clung to her, and it seeped into Elena's eyes as soon as they met. What's wrong? Elena signed slowly, fingers brushing Jane's hand. Jane shook her head. Nothing. Just, people at school asking questions. Judging. Elena's lips pressed into a thin line. She signed, hesitantly. They are afraid, maybe. Not us. Just, the unknown. Jane's heart ached at the subtle truth in Elena's words. She wanted to say more, to reassure her, but she hesitated. Elena studied her for a long moment, then gently squeezed her hand. I understand, she signed. But sometimes I get scared too. Jane nodded, recognizing the vulnerability she rarely saw. Elena had always carried herself with a graceful confidence, but beneath it was a cautious heart, one that had been hurt before. They walked in silence along the path, shoulders brushing, hands entwined, both aware that love sometimes needed courage as much as tenderness. And tonight, courage meant facing not just the world outside, but their own fears within. That night, Jane wrote in her journal. Love isn't easy. It's not a fairy tale. But with Elena, I want to face every hard thing. Even the fear. Even the judgment. even the silence that sometimes scares us both. And somewhere in the city, Elena lay awake too, hands resting on her chest, feeling the same pull of hope and fear tangled together. The weekend arrived with a soft drizzle, turning the streets slick and shiny. Jane had promised Elena they'd spend the day together, and she arrived at the community center with an umbrella in one hand and a small canvas in the other. Elena greeted her with a bright smile, her scarf damp from the rain. She held out her hand, signing quickly. "Come inside. I have something to show you." Inside, the art room smelled of paint and wet brushes. On a table in the corner sat a series of unfinished paintings, abstract, chaotic, and full of raw emotion. Jane's eyes widened. These are amazing." She signed slowly, pointing to the brush strokes. "But they feel intense." Elena nodded, setting down her brush. She sat across from Jane, hands folded, and signed. "These are pieces of me. Some days, they're too much to share. But with you, I feel I can." Jane felt her chest tighten. She understood. The vulnerability, the willingness to show her unpolished, messy self, was a gift, and she wanted to honor it. She reached across the table, fingers brushing Elena's. "I want you to share everything. Even the hard parts. Even the fears. I'm not going anywhere." The weekend arrived with a soft drizzle, turning the streets slick and shiny. Jane had promised Elena they'd spend the day together, and she arrived at the community center with an umbrella in one hand and a small canvas in the other. Elena greeted her with a bright smile, her scarf damp from the rain. She held out her hand, signing quickly. "Come inside. I have something to show you." Inside, the art room smelled of paint and wet brushes. On a table in the corner sat a series of unfinished paintings, abstract, chaotic, and full of raw emotion. Jane's eyes widened. These are amazing." She signed slowly, pointing to the brush strokes. "But they feel intense." Elena nodded, setting down her brush. She sat across from Jane, hands folded, and signed. "These are pieces of me. Some days, they're too much to share. But with you, I feel I can." Jane felt her chest tighten. She understood. The vulnerability, the willingness to show her unpolished, messy self, was a gift, and she wanted to honor it. She reached across the table, fingers brushing Elena's. "I want you to share everything. Even the hard parts. Even the fears. I'm not going anywhere." It was a Sunday afternoon when Jane decided to introduce Elena to her world outside the community center. The sky was clear, a crisp warmth settling over the city as they walked toward Jane's apartment. Jane's parents had been curious about Elena for months, and though Jane loved them dearly, she knew the introduction could be complicated. When Elena arrived, she extended her hand in greeting, signing carefully, "Hello. Nice to meet you." Jane's mother, ever polite but slightly tense, responded with a hesitant smile. Her father, leaning back in his chair, raised an eyebrow. As the afternoon unfolded, Jane translated gently, bridging worlds with patience and care. Elena answered questions with grace and charm, her hands dancing in the air as Jane interpreted. There were moments of awkward silence, glances exchanged, but Jane could see her parents warming to Elena's sincerity. After dessert, Jane's father cleared his throat. "Jane, are you serious about her?" Jane took a deep breath, her hand brushing Elena's under the table. She signed slowly to Elena. "Are you ready?" Elena nodded, fingers trembling slightly, then signed back. "Yes. I'm ready." Jane turned to her parents, signing and speaking at the same time. "Yes. We're serious. I love her. And she loves me." Her parents exchanged a long look. Then, finally, her mother smiled, a little tight at first, but genuine. "Well, love isn't easy. But if she makes you happy." Jane's father sighed, but the tension in his shoulders eased. "We just want you to be safe and happy." Elena squeezed Jane's hand, signing softly, "I want to belong, here too." Jane leaned over, brushing her lips against Elena's temple. "You already do," she whispered. Later that evening, walking home, Jane realized something. Love wasn't just about stolen kisses or shared glances. It was about showing up for each other when the world outside questioned, doubted, or simply didn't understand. Elena slipped her hand into Jane's, fingers interlacing perfectly. "No matter what," she signed. Jane nodded, pressing her forehead against Elena's. "No matter what," she echoed aloud. And for the first time, the city felt small around them, a quiet cocoon where love, bold, patient, and unwavering, could thrive. Weeks had passed since the introduction to Jane's parents, and life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. They shared quiet mornings over coffee, afternoons painting or reading together, and evenings walking hand in hand through the city streets. One crisp Saturday, Elena led Jane to the community center once more. But this time, the art room was empty, except for a single easel in the center, holding a blank canvas. Jane's curiosity spiked. Elena turned to her, eyes shimmering. She signed slowly, deliberately. "Today, I want to make a promise." Jane's heart skipped. A promise? What could it be? Elena gestured to the canvas, then took Jane's hands into hers. Not words, not sound, just this. She picked up a brush, dipping it in deep blue, then guided Jane's hand over the canvas. Together, they painted a single heart, imperfect, layered, and alive with movement. When they stepped back, the heart glowed on the canvas, a symbol of everything they had built: trust, patience, vulnerability, and love. Elena signed one final message. "I want life with you. All of it." Jane felt tears prick her eyes. She took Elena's face in her hands, brushing her thumbs across her cheeks, and signed back. "Yes. All of it. Always with you." They leaned in, sealing the promise with a tender kiss. It wasn't about perfection or grand gestures. It was about presence, about choosing each other every day, in every small way. Later, walking home, Jane thought about how far they had come, from the first awkward meeting, to quiet lessons in language and love, to this moment of shared commitment. The city buzzed around them, but in the warmth of each other's hand, they had created a world entirely their own. And as the night air wrapped around them, Jane whispered softly, almost to herself. "Love doesn't need sound. It needs trust, patience, and you." Elena squeezed her hand in response, signing once more. "Always you." Months passed, each one weaving Jane and Elena more tightly into each other's worlds. They found rhythm in their routines, early mornings sharing breakfast and whispered, or signed, conversations, afternoons exploring the city, evenings curled together with books or paintbrushes. Jane had begun introducing Elena to more of her teaching life. Students were fascinated by her fluency in sign language, and a small ASL club emerged, bridging worlds in a way Jane never imagined possible. Elena became a beloved figure, teaching art workshops and mentoring students, her warmth leaving an impression on everyone she met. They rented a small apartment together, full of sunlight and canvases, books stacked in organized chaos. It was imperfect, but it was theirs. And every day, they chose each other, through quiet mornings, small arguments, and the simple act of living together. One night, after a long day, Elena signed softly as they lay on the couch. "I love this, us." Jane smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Me too. Every day." Years later, the love that had started in whispers and gestures had only grown stronger. Their hands were intertwined as naturally as breathing. Their laughter echoed through the apartment, through the classrooms, through the city streets. They faced challenges, misunderstandings, the occasional judgment from outsiders, and the quiet fear that life sometimes brought, but they faced them together. Every obstacle was a lesson in patience, understanding, and devotion. One spring evening, they returned to the community center where it had all begun. Children laughed and painted around them. Jane gestured to the blank canvas on the easel. Elena smiled, taking her hand. Another heart, she signed. Jane nodded. Together, they painted, not just a heart, but a swirl of colors representing every step of their journey: first meeting, hesitant friendship, stolen glances, fears faced, promises made, love chosen. When they stepped back, they looked at it and laughed softly. Imperfect, chaotic, alive, just like them. Jane whispered, brushing her forehead against Elena's, "We made it. All of it." Elena's eyes sparkled. She signed one last message. "Always us." And in that quiet, unspoken, perfect moment, Jane understood something she had known all along: love doesn't need words to be heard. It needs trust, courage, patience, and a heart willing to listen, in every way. Together, they walked into the evening, hands clasped, hearts full, a lifetime ahead of them. Turn on notifications bell to never miss a story. Share your thoughts in the comments, we love hearing from our viewers.